Hi, I'm Jessie.
And I'm Natasha.
And together, we host Not Creative, the podcast that flips the script on creativity, bringing together the ones with the ideas and the ones who make it all happen behind the scenes.
In each episode, we dive into the minds of creatives, problem solvers, and the people who prove you don't have to wear the creative label to shape brilliant ideas.
Let's get into it.
Well, welcome to Not Creative, the podcast that flips the script on creativity, looking at the ones who spark ideas and the ones who bring them to life. I'm Jessie.
Hi, I'm Natasha. And we have a very special guest today with us. Hi, Costanza.
Hi.
Costanza is a good friend of ours. Jess and I had the pleasure of working with her many moons ago. We have to stop saying this, Jess, because it really ages us, doesn't it?
Aging me.
But for over 5 years, Costanza has been leading the global content team at Celonis. And before that, she's done everything from writing to heading up marketing teams across B2B and some B2C also. So we're really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be reunited.
Yes.
Good. I'm really looking forward to getting your view on a few things because I think you have a really unique worldview, Costanza, in that you have sat in creative seats and you've sat in, I'm going to use bunny ears, to say not creative seats, but obviously, more business driven seats. So I'd love to ask you just out of the gate, what is creativity to you?
Extremely loaded question. Well, firstly, I love the premise of this podcast because this is my number one pet peeve. The idea that there are creative roles and non-creative roles and what forms of creativity we value, what forms of creativity are appreciated. My take on it has always been that all thinking is creative. Creativity is so often considered the purview of the artist or, the even in a B2B context, the writer, the designer. But I think creativity is just thinking. It's perspective. It's problem solving a problem creatively. All problem solving is creative. But as a culture, in business, it doesn't get recognized or thought of that way. And I really resent it for various reasons.
It's a really good segue into what does it mean to be creative, right? Because I love how you put how creativity is problem solving. Every problem solving is creativity. So what does it mean to be creative for you?
So for me, being creative is very much about thinking around a problem, right? And bringing different perspectives to a problem, trying to look at something from different angles, finding a way into something. In a business context, you have goals, you have something that you're trying to achieve. And the creative part of it is, how do I achieve this in a way that's exciting, fun, enjoyable for me, that works, that is relevant to my audience within the constraints of business, whether that is resourcing constraints or the subject matter or time, speed, volume, etc. So from that point of view, my job has always been creative, whether it has been I am the writer or whether it has been I am the operational person who enables other people's creativity.
Can I say I just love the pragmatist look on creativity?
Yeah.
I think it's like music to mine and Jess's ears, looking at creativity from such a perspective, and as two not creatives in the room.
It's I think there is I was actually having this conversation with someone else the other day, and they asked me if I thought project management was creative. And I was like, absolutely, yes. Are you kidding? Project management is so creative. The amount of variables that you have to juggle to get to the right outcome, you have to come up with creative solutions to a problem. everybody's under resourced. Nobody has budget. Everyone wants to, spend time and thought and get inspiration. And often you don't have those things. And so it's like, how do you get to the best outcome, especially in a business context, with what you have available? And that is absolutely creative. And how do you manage other people who, whose creativity works in different ways?
How
So
do
yeah.
you manage creativity for other people? I mean, I would love your view, and obviously I don't want you to name and shame anything and say anything that you're going to get in trouble for, but obviously you're an extremely talented writer. That's how we first met you, was your um actual creative. I'm going to use bunny ears for anyone just listening on, you're an actual creative, Costanza, whereas the rest of us are, creative adjacent. But when you're managing projects, managing and beyond projects, managing big programs of, content and creative through your different roles, how do you find that process without being like, just move over and let me type. Let me just type this thing myself. How do you enable creativity as a creative yourself, I guess, is the better question.
Well, the first thing that I had to learn was, well, it's a different job, right? So the first thing I had to learn was to step back and to say, this is my role is to enable your creativity, and that creativity is not always going to look like mine would, or the end result's not going to look like what I would have done. And that's okay, right? Like that, we are in different roles, and my role is to help you get to your outcome, not my outcome done by someone else. So I've always seen it as everybody's different, everybody works differently, some people have different strengths, etc. And my role became, how do I put the guardrails in place to get the best out of this person? How do I safeguard their time? How do I give clarity? How do I give them all of the context that they need to be able to navigate this? How do I give them the kinds of feedback that is constructive and helpful and, pushes the work to a higher level? But also, how do I do that in a concise timeline? And how do I do that without dropping quality as well? One of the things that's always been very, very important to me as a creative or creative adjacent, and it's very flattering that you think I'm a legit creative, because I don't always think of myself that way. But, I've always had a very high standard for what good looks like. Sometimes too high, every strength is a weakness to excess.
Never too high.
Well, sometimes too high for the demands of the business, which wants volume and speed. And so how do you maintain that standard while, producing at volume and speed? Or how do you tactically lower that standard? Although actually that's not what I did. I set out to prove that it would be possible. After some initial reluctance, after some complaints about you cannot achieve this volume and this speed without lowering the standard, I actually then was like, okay, the challenge accepted. How do I do this without compromising what I believe good content looks like?
If you think about like creativity and being creative, is it a choice? Is it a calling? Is it a gift? Is it a curse? Is it none of the above? Is it something completely different? What is your view?
I think it's a practice. I think it's like everything, it's a discipline, it's a practice, it's a habit, it's something you do over and over again. And I think it does a disservice to people to only value certain types of creativity, or to assume that creativity only looks a certain way. And so I think there's a lot of creative people out there who don't realize that they are in fact creative, or that what they're doing is creative. I use project managers as an example. I work very closely with the head of global campaigns at Celonis, and she's brilliant and she's an operational genius. And I wouldn't have fixed the content problem. I wouldn't have found a solution to the volume, speed, quality trifecta without her. And I 100% don't think she would say that she's a creative, but the creative problem solving that she does is incredibly important. And so I think it's just a matter of how you think about it, and actually the practice of doing it, of thinking about problems, of thinking about new perspectives, of taking in new input, and like crunching it and coming up with something else. But I think everybody has that capacity in them and just needs to foster it or have people foster it for them and be given an opportunity to apply it to problems, to work, to whatever it is that they're doing.
I
And
love
it
that.
doesn't always have to be high art. It's just a way of thinking.
Yeah,
in my
like a
view.
muscle that you can strengthen with use, but it's latent, it's there, but if it's not immediately in your repertoire, like you're not considered a creative genius. Like several of us are not considered creative geniuses.
I really think, all thinking is creative. So if you have a habit of thinking and you are being creative, and it's just how you apply it and what it looks like and appreciating that. Certain people have a facility with, the sort of creative genius that gets widely recognized, or like a really fancy headline or a really out of the box idea. But even if you don't, that's practice. I'm not good with headlines, for instance.
I don't
It's just
believe you.
not my strong point. But now and again, I have a friend who you both know who will sit me down and be like, write 50 headlines. When I'm like, please help me. Can you just like come up with something? And he's like, no, sit down, write 50 headlines. And guess what? The more headlines you write, at some point a good one comes out.
This really reminds me when I just started my career a million years ago as a copywriter. And I felt that before I got into this role, you have this very glamorous idea in your mind of what an advertising creative does and like what an advertising creative is. But the reality was that 99% of my time was sitting down and writing and rewriting the same things over and over and over again. And you have that 1% of time that is actually brainstorming, thinking about the crazy ideas, especially as a junior, right? Like who is gonna actually give the brilliant campaigns with junior? But the grunt work was exactly as I said. It's like sitting down and writing over and over and over and over and over again. And like just that repetition.
But yeah, because good marketing is consistency, right? But I also, and this is, I think, adjacent to what we're discussing, I also really resent this idea that there's, blue sky creative and bread and butter content, like brand campaigns and LinkedIn single image ads, and these are not the same. And it's just like all content lives in an ecosystem, and you can have a big bet blue sky creative or like a really cool exciting thing that you've worked on for ages, but if there aren't any ads promoting it, who's going to see it? I think a lot of content writers or artists or inherently believe in the value of high quality content, which I also believe in the value of high quality content. But the reality is that in the environment that we live in and work in, it isn't always true that good content rises to the top. You need a whole distribution engine around it. And every single item, every single part of that asset is important. And every single asset is also an opportunity. Why can't the LinkedIn ad be funny, creative, smart, clever, clear, whatever it is? Why expend all the energy on the big asset when you have an opportunity every day to write an amazing email, write an incredible ad, whatever it is?
I'd argue that you do need to inject creativity in all of the touch points, right? Because how are people gonna click on your ad if it's not engaging enough? To your point, like I feel like in the world that we live in today, that we have so much competing for attention every single day, every single hour, every single minute, that even if you do have a distribution channel center, wherever it is, like you still need to be compelling and attractive enough. And I think you touched on something quite important there, like this idea of just investing the blue sky thinking on the really big ticket items, but forgetting that the day to day is just as important.
Yeah, no, and that's showcasing my own biases, because writing good emails is really hard. Writing good ads is a specialist skill. The team that I built, I insisted that they write everything. We weren't big enough to justify specialists, but also I wanted people to have ownership of that funnel end to end, of every content format, of every asset. If you really think that the work that you've done is amazing and everyone should see it, then why would you give up ownership of all of the little pieces of content that would activate it? And I think people lose sight of that, or, there is a perception that that's not true, but it is just as important. Sometimes it's more important because it actually gets more exposure. And it's about taking pride in your work, no matter what the work is, I think.
Completely agree. Completely agree. I think you touched on something interesting there, which is the value others put on different types of creativity versus the value we have in creating it. Is there the more joy you have creating it, does that inherently make it a kind of more creative output because you've put, that passion and soul into it versus that, that blue sky thing? Is that part of the value exchange, really?
I think that's really interesting. I think it depends on your audience, right? It depends on what you appreciate about content. Sometimes all I want is information. I just need something to tell me exactly what I need to know. And that is valuable in of itself. If it does so in a smart, clever, funny way, great. But sometimes if it's just like straight to the point, that's also valuable to me. And it depends on what you appreciate. Lots of people are like, oh, these puns are distracting, for instance, to name one common objection.
B2B is always trying to kill fun.
B2B is always trying to kill fun and assumes that, their buyers aren't people who have a sense of humor. But even so, or, perhaps you're reading something not in your first language. And so puns are confusing. Or I think it depends on what you as the consumer are looking for and what you as the creative are trying to deliver. So that's how you define value, basically. And I think good content delivers value. It just depends on what that what the goal you're trying to achieve is. And this is a very, work focused take on it, obviously, because there's always a goal. But I think it probably bears out for art in a more traditional sense as well, because presumably as an artist, you are trying to express something and you're trying to get a message across. So you're trying to bring joy or happiness or beauty. And so it also depends on how you define value in that context.
Yeah,
it's really good
I
point.
always find it really interesting going around art museums and kind of taking in, I sound like a wanker, but I'm not, I promise, or maybe I am, I don't know. But going around and there's something about the sort of process of sometimes when you see something and it's really striking and moving, you think, how did this come out of someone's brain and onto this surface? What was the process in which this thing came to life? And yeah, and to even think that that's connected to, our content stories and our content journeys that we're creating.
As the consumer, if you're going into an art museum, certain things resonate, certain things don't. Sometimes when you read a really good book at the right time, or when you hear a song and it means something to you in that moment because you are going through something, or and that is serendipitous. You can't necessarily predict that. Sometimes that piece of art actually has nothing to do with what you're bringing to it, but you are just seeing that thing in it because that's what you need to see. And that's much clearer with books, music, films, etc. But I think that's also true of marketing content now and again.
To be honest, I know we are joking about this, but I was reflecting the other day about emotion in creative and creativity, and I really like how you're putting in terms of what is the value perceived in what is it that we are consuming, and it can be content, it can be an advert, it can be art. We have the urinal as a big example of the value of art and how the value is on the person who is consuming whatever it is that is being fed to them in a creative form, being music or books or adverts or content or art.
I have this concept that I wanted to introduce to you, which is the Room 101 concept. You actually have spent more time in the UK than either Natasha or I. This is another collection of expats. We've just been collecting expats in our quest here at Not Creative Podcast. But there was a show that Frank Skinner hosted, which was called the Room 101 show, and celebrities would come on and contribute an item that they would banish, and it's like a concept rather than a physical item, although sometimes it was a physical item. So when you think about creativity, the act of being creative, the practice of being creative, is there anything you would banish, knowing this is a completely safe space, to Room 101?
We were joking earlier about how the number one suggestion that you get as a content marketer is, why don't we do a podcast? So I feel like that's contentious in this audience. No, I mean, I think it goes back to what we were just discussing, which is, my pet peeve is this idea that some jobs are creative and others are not, and that we value some types of creativity over others when there is more than enough space for all types of creativity, whether that is operational or muscular prose on a website or big headline or extremely cerebral 60-page white paper. Again, very B2B oriented examples, but all painting, music, whatever. There's more than enough space for all of those, and this idea that some jobs are creative and others are not. And also, sorry, now we're going to work our way down the list of pet peeves.
It's okay.
Yeah. Now I'm supposed to go for the next half hour.
There is plenty of space in Room 101.
Yes. No, I need a house, possibly an apartment building. I think the idea of innate creative genius also really irritates me. This idea that some people are born creative and others are not, and that conditions for genius are required. And this comes up a lot in a work context, right? Because you have deadlines, because you have commitments, because you have things that you need to achieve at a certain time. You can't necessarily take the time that you want for something. And, how do you produce good work regardless of what the constraints are? And on the flip side, the fact that those constraints are important. I think constraints, guardrails, fuel creativity, right? Like, you can come up with the most creative concept, but if it's not relevant to your audience, certainly in B2B, then that's creativity misapplied is just incompetence. You're just not good at your job. Sorry, that's a hot take.
I love it. I love it. This is the safest of spaces for this content. Absolutely.
Incompetence is a strong word. I want to roll that back. The point is that you're trying to solve a problem, and if you can be as creative as you like about it, but if your idea does not solve the problem, then you haven't solved the problem.
Wasted. It's a waste of creativity, isn't it? Yeah, it's a waste of creativity. I completely hear you. It's like, if it doesn't solve the brief, what's the point? And yeah, but I agree with you about constraints fuel creativity. I think this is a really good concept, because how many times have we been in a situation where, if we have weeks to do something, we really struggle, but as soon as we have a deadline, everything just gets sharper. I think it's like a human thing, that we work better in a constrained environment because we just get much more focused into what is it that we need to achieve, and we don't allow ourselves to be too distracted.
And it's human ingenuity. How do you work around a problem? And not to bring up the most B2B example ever, AI. The DeepSeek, the clamorous reveal of DeepSeek, that is born out of constraints, right? That can be directly led back to the chip ban. They didn't have the computing power, and so they found another way to do it. And you can call that creative or not creative because it's about the machine learning models, or it's creative. It's creativity.
I think it was a really, really interesting perspective and point of view on, the whole idea of creativity. So I think with that, I would ask, what is the number one thing that what we call not creatives do that you value the most? And by not creatives, we mean the job roles that are not intrinsically considered creative. I think we have already established with Costanza that everyone is creative and thinking is creative, which I absolutely love. And I'm taking it to heart. But if you look back at, what the world of marketing, advertising, and other kind of areas that will have roles that have creative in their job titles would consider not creative. Yeah, so the question going back to it is, what is the number one thing that non-creatives do that you value the most?
I think one of the most valuable things that creative adjacent roles provide is structure. It goes back to what we were saying about guardrails, constraints for that creativity, focus, and then time and space. And, so much of my time leading a team is spent making sure that that structure is in place, that clarity is in place, that alignment is in place, so that the more creative people, or the people who are engaged in the creative work, can work better and more effectively and have everything they need to do their best creative work. I think structure is so vastly under, and a lot of creatives have structure. I love reading authors' routines when they're like, oh yeah, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I write 200 words, and then I spend the rest of the day being inspired and touching grass, and great. I love that. And then some people are like, no, I wander around for 3 months, and then I write a book in 2 weeks, or whatever it is. But in a lot of contexts, you don't have that. So it's just like, how do you create the right environment and the right structure for people to be able to do that without necessarily spending 3 months touching grass? Yeah, I think structure is so undervalued. And as somebody who is not good at it in my personal and professional life, well, actually, I've had to get good at it professionally, but as someone for whom it doesn't come naturally, like, I really, really value it, and I really I think it's undervalued, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's one of those skill sets that, like, maybe people don't appreciate it until they feel the absence. I'm not accusing you of that, but I know people who've been on a journey where they've felt the absence of it, and then they've come back and gone, oh gosh, I didn't have those guardrails, and then it was just a wild train ride.
Yes.
So I guess a follow-up, how do non-creatives contribute to creativity?
I mean, the structure is the most obvious example, but again, if we operate on the assumption that creativity is just thinking, then the thoughts of someone else who is involved in the project and the point of view of anybody who brings something different to it is obviously a huge contribution, right? But as part of that process, the input of any number of people is incredibly valuable. Anybody who makes me think differently about something or brings a fresh insight. And very often the people who are adjacent to that project, who aren't necessarily doing the work, but know all of the context and have a different point of view on, what the objectives are, what the goal is, or what the context that you're operating in is, are the most valuable, because they're like, have you thought about this? Or, you're losing sight of that, or yes, but, this is actually what we're trying to achieve. And that's hugely valuable. Priceless, I would say.
Priceless.
Oh, I like that.
Good collaborators are hard to find. Good collaboration is absolutely priceless, especially if you're the sort of person who needs collaboration to, creative work does not happen in a vacuum. Maybe some people, well, it doesn't happen in my vacuum. Let's put it that way. Maybe some people are just like spritzing with everything they need inside, but for the most part, I don't think that that's the thing. I bring my thinking to it, but it has to be prompted by any number of inputs. Inputs is a very technical word for what I'm talking about. Inspiration. But
no, but it makes sense. Yeah.
I've been in B2B too long. I'm sorry.
I think I know the answer to the last question that we have, but thinking about this collaboration, thinking about all the people that are adjacent and that are kind of like coming together, like to help and to support the creative work. Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite, like, not creative? And I'm using like just as many years, and why?
I mean, this is where I give a shout out to my partner in crime, Elizabeth, who is such a huge part of the success of the content team at Celonis. She's the head of campaigns, and she's amazing, and she has such an operational strategic nous. And without her, I wouldn't have managed to scale the team, and we all owe her a massive debt for what she has enabled us to do. So yeah, she's my favorite today. No, she's brilliant. She will hate to be named in this, but as I said, good collaboration is priceless. I would not be here if it weren't for everything that she brought to the table. And I think we complement each other really well. And having that kind of partnership is really important to me personally, but also just generally.
Yeah, that's
I'm
awesome.
loving all the love.
I don't think we're always nice enough to the people around us when we're in the trenches with them. It's only later. So I think it's great. I think it's great to give these shout outs now.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think this has been such a fun conversation.
It really
Honestly,
has.
you made us think about creativity from so many different angles and just how you're putting creativity being strategic thinking and solving problems. I just find this a very refreshing perspective, and just having that appreciation for structure and for what collaboration can generate and can bring to the table. I think it's been great just having this chat.
Thank you for making me think about it. So many of these thoughts are latent or, in the day to day, they sort of get lost. And it's only when you're asked to crystallize them that you're like, oh, no, I have opinions about this. I have extremely strong opinions, and it helps to think them through with people. And I really appreciated the thoughtfulness of your questions and the discussion. Invite me back anytime.
Yes.
I want the off the record, burn it to the ground one. I'm not going to lie. That's the one that I really want to do.
It's as this is my first podcast, all the really, really hot takes are still being kept under wraps. But, as I get more comfortable with the
Once she comes
exposure.
back for the next season, Jess, then we'll get all the juicy, burn it to the ground takes.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, this is so fun. Thank you so much for coming along and talking about creativity with us.
No, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure and a delight.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Costanza. And thanks, everyone, for listening. If there is anyone on the other side. See you next time.
Mom.
Thanks for listening to Not Creative.
If you like this episode, follow us for more and spread the word.
You can find us on all the streaming platforms, Instagram, and YouTube at Not Creative Podcast.
Catch you next time.
I mean, that was pretty freaking good, man.